Here he is. What are you drinking?
Perrier, just a
Okay,
hit.
I have I have La Croix. Hold
There you
on.
go.
There you go.
Yeah.
The nice thing, Mike, the nice thing about healthcare unfiltered, it is completely unfiltered. I mean, you can drink, dance, do whatever it is, which is basically how we have fun, you know?
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
I want to start by you introducing yourself to listeners. Our goal is to talk about your book, obviously, The Fun Habit, how it came along and everything like that. And that you have to convince us that we can have fun in every single setting. But a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so some of your listeners might know me as a HIMSS influencer. My day job is working in workplace wellness. I'm part of an ambulatory care unit that provides upstream services, so preventative services in mass for Providence. But my academic background is in organizational psychology, specifically using tools of positive psychology for betterment. And for folks that don't know what positive psychology is, it's essentially a facet of clinical psychology that's meant to not necessarily treat, mental deficit, but tools that anyone can use for betterment. The big names in there, Dr. Csikszentmihalyi, Dr. Seligman. So my backstory, kind of how the book came about, because you already mentioned that, we're here.
But Mike,
Yeah,
just before you get to the book, when you say organizational psychologist, I'm familiar with the term psychologist, so are my listeners. But when you say organizational psychologist, can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's more, psychologists tend to go into a certain situation and provide an intervention, right? Like for a clinical psychologist, that might be CBT. Now, ACT is really popular. For an organizational psychologist, it's more population-based interventions. So we're looking at group dynamics. A lot of us go into a corporate setting and figure out, what is wrong with a particular situation and how can we fix that through intervention. So for me in particular, my academic background is really looking at workplace wellness in general, like how are people getting it right and why are so many things in that area going awry. And so academically, that's my background.
So how did you decide to write a book? Because you wrote the book literally in the middle of a pandemic, and your book is about having fun, and it's hard to believe that we were having fun during a pandemic. So take me through what led you to decide to write this book.
Yeah, so the book got sold before the pandemic. So for folks that don't know how selling a nonfiction book works, generally you write a chapter, you write the outline, and then you're given, an advance to actually write the book. So the book and the ideas really came about in 2016. There was a lot of emerging research suggesting that here in the Western world, how we're pursuing happiness. So a professor I name drop a lot, Dr. Iris Mouse out of Cal Berkeley, has done some really interesting work in this area, but it's been replicated over and over. And it's essentially that this kind of over emphasis on we've got to be happy, good vibes only, what's now referred to as toxic positivity, can become really problematic. And that happened to me because I was a big zealot of, positive psychology and had really literally quantified my life to try and be happy all the time. And it came crashing down on me. And so, um, you know, the book was sold, just to be clear, before the pandemic, but then it got sold right before the pandemic. And I had to actually, finish the book during the pandemic. So it became an interesting endeavor, made complicated. And again, I already name dropped HIMSS, but I was in Orlando in March 2020, right before the world shut down. HIMSS actually was, I believe, the first major conference to decide to shutter their doors, and there's a whole history behind that. Because if you recall, like Trump was going to show up, and there's a lot of history with regards to making that decision. But I ended up going anyways because my daughter's birthday was around that time, and I promised her I would take her to Disney World, and ended up getting COVID, and ended up, unfortunately, one of the folks that suffered the fate of long COVID, and had some interesting neurological symptoms for about 6 to 7 months, and that made writing the book even more challenging.
That was you. You had COVID and you had side effects that lasted 6, 7 months.
Yeah, I'm still dealing with neuropathy. but I had some severe neurological effects. I essentially lost the ability to sleep. So it started about 3 months after getting the initial infection, but at the end of May, beginning of June 2020, it was the most bizarre thing. I just, like for 3 weeks, I wasn't able to get sleep. I was getting like little 30-minute episodic intervals of sleep. And for whatever reason, I don't understand neurochemistry enough to know exactly what happened. And I don't believe anyone really fully understands, the effects. I think some folks believe it's neuroinflammation. Some folks believe it's a vascular, result. I don't know. What I do know is that I couldn't sleep. And once I couldn't sleep for about 3 weeks, I did end up, unfortunately, having some negative clinical outcomes, and certainly got depressed.
Wow. Oh, that's very tough to write a book while you're having all of these. I mean, I
But the
hope you're
good
feeling
news
better
is,
now.
like I mentioned in the book, I think that's one of the crux of the book, right? Is that, this whole idea that we always need to be happy has become problematic. And we know that leads to generally negative consequences if you have this over concern, right? Not valuing happiness, not wanting your family to be happy, not wanting to flourish, but always ruminating on like, how can I get happier? Or what, comparing yourself against others, or, what we call essentially succumbing to the hedonic treadmill, right? That's the clinical term. I realized, because I had, at least immersed myself in the science there, I knew that once I got better, I would be able to get into a place where I could experience joy again. And so that really helped me have the resilience to get through that really tough period.
Mike, I have to, I want to just express my condolences about the loss of your brother,
Oh,
because
thank you.
as I was, I started reading the book, and really, the first thing you mentioned is how obviously you lost your brother, and it was a sharp. I did not expect that to start the book. Obviously, it's a book that is basically dedicated to fun and happiness, and it started by a tragedy and the loss of your loved one. Um, tell me about this. I mean, what was his loss a motivation for you to try to find more nicer things in life, I guess? I mean, how much of his death led you to this quest?
Yeah, so I think what was the illumination of his passing was a real intimate relationship with time. So I had always been striving and had always moved the goalpost. And, I do like the idea of peak performance and always trying to best yourself, right? But what I didn't realize was how much I was giving up because I thought that time was infinite, right? And so I have two small kids. I kind of was pushing time with them to the side because I could make that up in the future. I was letting, friendships go that really, as we know from Robert's amazing study, he has a great book out right now about loneliness and, essentially, how impactful those things are when we let friendships go. I had kind of pushed all that to the side just because I was achieve, right? And so to answer your question, what that did after I got through the long process of grieving his death was, holy cow, like I probably only have 40 good years left. And with regards to my kids, less than that. And I'm not spending my time in a way where I'm going to look back at it and be proud of my choices. And so that was really the impetus of going, it's not just all about me and how I want to be happy. It's really about how can I create a life that's joyful, but that connects me to these people that I love and the things that I love doing, so that it's restorative rather than depleting. And I think you see that in your field right now, right? I mean, I talk about it in the book because some of my academic work is with physicians. I believe the latest APA stats right now, physician burnout is at the highest it's ever been, 69%, if I've got that right. And we can put it in your show notes. So here, just to, because I believe a lot of your listeners are physicians, like in the book, I champion it. You remember that. I think this is one of the most important vocations there is, because we're supporting life, right? We're trying to keep people well. And yet, because there's this sort of lack of joy, you're seeing just all sorts of interesting outcomes. And that's a well-studied vocation, so I'm not trying to highlight it. I'm just suggesting that it's one that's in need of some help, and along with a host of so many other different vocations. Right here in the US specifically, we're just so poor at allowing people the opportunity to enjoy time out of work. Whether that's the entrepreneur stuck in hustle culture, whether that's the person working too many hours because it's just not humanly possible to fit that much in, whether that's this new era of the sandwich generation. That's the first time in life, because we're all having kids later, right? Like, we have kids, and now we have aging parents that can't help us take care of our kids. So we're now on both ends, essentially the caregivers for two sets of folks that we love, and we were just time poor, right? And so it goes back to your initial question, this whole sense of time poverty, and how impactful it is, how, especially here in the United States, we're not giving it enough credence, is essentially the thesis of the book, right? Like, whether you call it fun, whether you call it leisure, whether you call it self-care, whatever you call it, the fact that we're not taking any time off the table for ourselves is clearly leading to some really detrimental outcomes.
I mean, we'll go over this because there are lots of strikes against you sometimes to be able to do that. And you mentioned about physicians, and we'll go over this as well. But I like in your introduction, there's a statement that I'm going to read because I want to reflect on it, and it might give an idea to the listeners what we're talking about a little bit in more depth. When I say it's time to stop chasing happiness and start having fun, these principles are fully grounded in peer-reviewed research. So what you're advocating is stop chasing something that you may never really achieve. Just let's try to have fun in the present. How much did you know before you wrote the book, all of this stuff, and you just had to put it into writing, right? Because this is your area, versus you went and did your research and read, and you spent a year just trying to get articles and understand this, and then you put it in. Like, how much did you know before you even wrote versus additional research that you had to do, and then you brought this research in and put it into words?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because I knew I was onto something, but you're certainly right. I treated the initial manuscript like a literature review, because that's one of the ways I have fun. I'm kind of a geek that way, right? Like, and it allowed me to connect to some amazing researchers. And I think what I found was that there was a lot lacking in the clinical psychology realm, but a really rich research in the social psychology realm. So I kind of tapped into that, like, wow, okay, we talk about, happiness in clinical terms quite a bit. There's some amazing books, like thousands on Amazon, right? But a lot of social psychology was falling to the wayside, and it was showing that outcomes can really be improved through either reframing or adding elements to the things that we're already doing. So even if you can't necessarily go off and, reclaim an old hobby or whatever, right? Because sometimes when people trivialize what my message is, that's what they think, that's what they hear, right? Oh, you're just telling me to go take a dance class. Like, I don't need to read a whole book. But as you mentioned, that's not necessarily, if you want to do that, great. I think that's a great place to start if you have that type of privilege. But if you don't, if you're not doing at least some of the things that you enjoy, a whole host of interesting outcomes happen. And that came from really digging into the research. I think I had a leg up because in workplace wellness, one of the tenets of physiological and psychological well-being in the workplace is autonomy. The more someone feels like they have the autonomy to make decisions, organize their time and their schedule, it's clear, these are correlations, not causation, but it's clear that it correlates highly with both physiological healthy outcomes and psychologically healthy outcomes, the higher the autonomy, right? And so the crux of the book is, how do you reclaim, your agency and autonomy outside of work, right? Or in some cases at work. And so I think that was the underpinning of knowledge. Like, hey, we talk about this all the time at work, but we're not talking about, this sense, call it locus of control or whatever you want.
The culture of work, anywhere you are, the culture, the environment, the expectations, they're very difficult. They're very demanding. I mean, it's really, I mean, there's an element where you have control over as an individual, but then you've got the culture of the environment around you. I mean, you even mentioned that in your book. You even say, what I'm suggesting is that society has now devalued fun and leisure so much, it's significantly harming us. I agree it's harming us not having fun and leisure, but society has devalued this.
And I think specifically U.S. society, like you look at, I won't just keep hammering on physicians specifically because you see it across. No, but I meant because you see in the EU all vocations, because you certainly see this. It's been highlighted in various documentaries that there's clear transition rituals for physicians in EU countries. Across the board, you're seeing now in earnest EU countries playing with a 4-hour work week, right? So that you're extending that body of renewal, for 3 days versus 2. But even simple things like shutting down email servers at the end of a Friday so that, your employer can't send you work-related emails over the weekend so that your weekend's actually protected. These things seem small, especially to the American social norm. That's like, wait, what? That doesn't make sense. But I give the younger generation a lot of credit. Like, again, working with the workplace well-being, as a doctoral student within a humongous hospital group here in California, the younger doctors, I mean, they were advocating, for having that type of space. And you're seeing it across the board. I think, again, let's back up and talk in more general terms. But I think as you see parity begin to separate, right, people understand they're giving up a lot for not much given back, right? This issue of an exchange of value. And I talk about it, especially in the gig economy, right? Like, things like Uber, things like Grubhub and things where they're app-based gig vocations. Like, these apps are literally incentivizing you to work more and figuring out how to pay you less, right? And that's true across the board. That's just like the most blatant, where you can actually quantify this extrapolation of value from someone's time. And so to answer your question, it's like we're working more, but the data suggests we're producing less. So what's happening, right? And so I think there's a pretty straight line with regards to, a lot of people are working harder only to make, a subset of folks rich.
But how are we going to shut down our email? I mean, the reality, we have the email on our smartphones, and basically you carry your smartphone everywhere. It's probably the first thing you look at when you wake up in the morning, at least for me. And then it's like, I joke around and I say, you know what? It's no longer an out of office message. It's really, you are being selective in who you answer, because I don't buy that you're not seeing my email because you're seeing it. You have an iPhone, you have a Samsung, you have a smartphone. You're going to see that email unless you completely don't install the email app on your personal phone and you use, I mean, you have to make an extra effort to do that. And I think, I don't know, it's very difficult to put the onus on the employees. And you say, well, your employer cannot reach you. I mean, you kind of held hostage to the employer unless you have complete financial autonomy. And you say, I don't really care. And you talk about this, about the FU money type of thing. You talk about that at some point in the book.
No, I think that's exactly right. I think it's going to require us, from leadership on down to set the stage, because social norms, as a behavioral scientist, I understand to change the current from the bottom up becomes extremely difficult. And that would require almost radicalization, right? Like there would, it wouldn't be comfortable. And so hopefully we can do it in another way. And so one of the things is like, how do you get to leadership and make them understand that it's in their best interest? And you're slowly but surely seeing that. So there is some bright light on the horizon, right? Like, again, I write about it in the book, but it just was reaffirmed in 2023 with regards to the developed world. The United States is the worst with regards to giving PTO, right? It's 2 weeks on average for 1 year's worth of work. That puts us at the very bottom. The only country worse than us is Micronesia at 9 days. But what's even more telling is that even though we're second to last, 50% of employees don't even take that time, right? And so Fortune 100 companies, knowing that one, that they have an attrition problem, but two, that they're burning people out, they're actually incentivizing people to take their vacation because they realize detaching from work, even if it's as subtle as just 2 weeks out of the year, becomes so important to, keep folks, energized in the way that they have vitality and vigor when they show up to work. And so, to kind of shorten this up, one of the big pieces of research that I found, to go back to your earlier question, how much of this was intuitive and how much of it was research based, as I was putting my arguments together, I landed on this one study. It's out of Stanford, Harvard, and MIT. It's called the hedonic flexibility principle. And it was a huge sample size, right? 28,000 participants, and that took this time survey. And so they were looking at, how people spent their time and how they felt about how they spent their time. And so it should be no surprise to anybody that folks that were burnt out generally find pretty poor ways to engage in leisure, right? In the literature, we call it passive leisure, and it can be unhealthy escapism, like, again, what you suggested, endless hours on your phone. It could be having a few too many cocktails. It could be you're so depleted, you just pop down on your couch and essentially channel surf till it's time to go to bed and rinse and repeat, right? What was amazing, though, was the folks that actually do have true transition rituals. So back to your point about the folks that do have the sort of confidence to turn off their phone and know that they can still answer all those emails when they wake up and engage in things that really light them up, what we would call active leisure, go to work the next day with a lot more vitality and are a lot more productive. So the irony here is the people that are actually having fun not only are more productive, but are living a much funner life. So if you had your choice to do less and have a life devoid of joy, versus a productive life and one that was fun, in that context, it becomes an easy choice, right?
You have my answer right there. You talk about expanding your fun file. Tell me a little bit about that. Like when you say about the fun file, I presume this is individualized. What might you suggest as fun? I may not view it as fun.
Absolutely.
So when you say about expanding the fun file, do you want to tell listeners what options they look at? How much, what's out there?
I think, it's so individual, right? And there's a lot of headwinds. One of the reasons that chapter was written was I was surprised by, just to disclose my age, I'm 50, and how many folks at 50 are like, I kind of just don't know how to have fun anymore. Like, Austin, what do you consider fun? And it's a shoulder shrug. It's kind of strange, right? Like if you can't answer and it was a very common sort of reaction. I've just been getting along to get along for so long. I don't even know if fun's important anymore. Okay, well, we've already built the case that it is, right? And so it requires you to do a little premeditated work. And as I write about in the book, sometimes that's the most difficult part, because to do that is inherently not really that fun, right? Like really, the first step is homework, okay. But to go through that exercise, be mindful of what are the things that you used to do that, after you did them, you felt fulfilled, you were smiling, that you can still do, right? There are going to be some that, you might have to grieve a little bit. In the book I write about, for me, it's Ironmans, right? I've had hip surgery now. So, even though I really found that enjoyable, it's off the table. But I don't, you can see in the background, I think, I have a guitar hanging up. I reconnected with music because that was something I really enjoyed doing. But when my kids were young, I had to relinquish it. And I kind of forgot how much I enjoy, sitting with my guitar and playing music. And so that's for me. But for your listeners, it's going to be whatever it is. Then inviting in some sort of adventure, whether that's, adventure you really doing, especially for folks that can't afford, even to do something locally or whatever it is, getting back in nature, visiting with friends, or it can be as simple as reconnecting with reading or some, because again, one of the headwinds is that in the, not just the US for this particular issue, but in the West in general, we kind of celebrate fun as high arousal activities, right? And I think that stops a lot of people in their tracks too. Like, I don't want to go to a rock concert. My idea of fun, isn't going to the club or whatever it is. It shouldn't be. You're 50. So it might be just, for my wife, it was reconnecting with the fact of taking a little bit of time off, going to this area that she really enjoys, this calm area, and having the time to read books that she really likes.
But, I think one of the things that we struggle with, at least in the current society, Mike, and I'd like your help with that, to help me and other listeners, is that life is about trade-offs. So there's this cultural thing that if I'm sitting down, and I love reading, by the way, I'm an avid reader. I'm hoping to read 15 books a year. I'm realistic, not like the 50 to 60 books a year. You think that by doing this, by taking that time, you are missing out on things that you could do to advance your professional career. I could be, writing another memo. I could be really talking, arranging a couple of meetings. I could be reviewing some files. I mean, like, I can never write this email that you suggest sometimes you write. You said, thank you for your message. I am traveling and will not be checking my email today. If this is an emergency, take a deep breath, repeat until you either feel better or forget why you emailed me, or both. Like, I can't. I mean, that's so how much of this is really realistic? Because I think we all fear that we could be doing something to advance our professional career. And unless you are either independently wealthy or you don't really need your profession to continue supporting your family, you have to adjust to the culture of wherever, whether it's a hospital, an office, a cancer center. You can always think, I can write another paper, I can write another grant, I could do a little bit more research, or I can really, do the fun stuff that you're doing. Which one is going to really pay me dividends for my professional career? Are we completely elusive? Are we completely, being paranoid? I mean, what do you tell listeners who think like that?
Yeah, so these are, really great questions. Within your environment, because this is not just unique to physicians, right? It's essentially anyone that's sort of operating in what we call now the knowledge economy, is that we don't know where the goalposts end, right? And so and I'm talking about super high achievers, from physicians all the way down to high-end CEOs, to venture capitalists, to folks that live more humble means, right? Middle-class folks. The ones that are the most successful, that have the longevity to engage in professional pursuits, are the ones that have clear transition rituals from when work is over. So those things that you just talked about, they can't be satiated, right? But what we do know, again, the statistics don't lie, is that folks that are engaged in that endless pursuit eventually are going to burn out, right? I think I made the strongest case for this in chapter 11 with regards to people that are looking at social impact, right? Because things like poverty, things like human trafficking, those aren't going to be problems that you're going to fix in your lifetime, right? Essentially, if you wanted to provide all of your time for making an impact in that manner professionally, you could. But the folks that do that have that kind of weird, idea that, the faster I run on a hamster wheel, the more successful I'm going to be, end up not being able to produce at all. So I think you need to ask yourself, okay, what is the long game here? What am I trying to achieve? And then also for a lot of folks that are kind of stuck in that rut, when I look back at my life, especially for parents like myself, am I going to be stoked that I was writing that grant at 2 a.m. and not paying attention to my partner and my kids? Or am I going to be excited that I got the grant? And so you can have your cake and eat it too. You just need to know, how much am I willing to give away in any given week? And then how much am I able to reclaim? And so often the mental frame I like is there's 168 hours in a week. If you want to give away half of that, 80 hours for your vocation, that still leaves, another 86, right? And so obviously some of that needs to be sleep. Hopefully you're sleeping at least 7 times 7. I didn't know I was coming on here to do math, but so hopefully you're sleeping at least 49, if not more hours. But that still leaves a big corpus of hours that you should be able to do, even if you're working the hours, which when we look at time surveys, when people say that they're working 70 hours a week, generally that's not true.
No, but that's actually, I love that you did the math. Actually, I have to admit, I haven't thought about it this way. But 24 multiplied by 7 days, and you subtracting 50 hours for sleep. Actually, when you do the math and when you put it like this, black and white, I can appreciate the fact that there is enough time.
Yeah, and so what happens is when you do get that busy, I'm really loving this professor right now by the name of Colin West. He calls it admin time, right? And so I see this with physicians, but I also see it with a lot of folks that are in the corporate environment. It's called admin work, and I have a lot of. I'm going to do a quick aside because this is kind of a confession. So when I first got into the digital health space, I was a beat writer for Very Well Health. And I was advocating for all these new digital tools. And so I remember when EMRs, really coming online and how great they were. And all of our articles that were coming out were peer reviewed by physicians, right? And I forget who the physician was. It was someone from Johns Hopkins. And he was like, you're only telling one side of the story. Do you realize how much EMRs are burning out physicians? Because and so there is all this admin work, right? Acknowledging the fact that all this stuff is just getting piled on and technology is making it more complex. For physicians, again, like, not to get off the rails, but I just know your audience. It could be as simple as admin having some empathy and figuring out how to hire scribes, right? Scribes aren't expensive, and that frees up some of your time to now recharge your batteries so you can be a better physician, right? I mean, most physicians are aware of the correlation between burnout and lack of empathy. And once a physician doesn't have empathy for their patients, clinical outcomes go up.
Absolutely. You know what? You actually have a couple of very interesting chapters, because I've seen that with physicians. You talk about how it's important to have fun with friends, and you even title, I believe, that chapter "Friendship is Weird" or something like that. And
it's a Bill Murray,
right? But you also talk about having fun with your children or as a parent. Understandably, being a parent is very challenging, especially when you have younger kids and you have a career and everything. But you really talk about the importance of social connection with friends. When you were doing your research, did you notice people are lonelier because of social media? They are not making an effort to stay in touch with your friends, because clearly it's intuitive. Who can even argue the importance of having good friends and colleagues? But I bet that you notice it's not really happening as commonly as you wish to. You wish you have witnessed.
Yeah, I think I tapped into something, and again, as anyone that reads the book, because I'm not a neuroscientist, but I interviewed some amazing ones like Lisa Feldman Barrett. Anyways, and I think what's clear, one, to answer your question in two parts, the younger generation, the fact that they're not having true connection. I mean, obviously you always got to be clear that these are correlations, but it's a really strong argument, right? That these folks are lonelier than they ever have been. mainly because it's performance art for an audience that doesn't care about their well-being, right? And so is social media having an impact? I think very few would argue that it's not, right? Because these aren't true connections. But what I really tapped into, and especially during the pandemic, so it's a little bit unfortunate that the pandemic allowed for this to sort of emerge, but connecting through Zoom, connecting through sort of long distance relationships, even if that's just long distance across town because our physiological safety was at risk during that time. It's clear that the oxytocin that's released when we do feel intimate connection with our loved ones, with the friends that we care about, is one of the additive pieces to building health equity, right? And so we don't know exactly why that is, but it's clear from a host of different studies attacking it from various angles that feeling like we have friends and that we're giving, not just taking, is the glue that sort of keeps our, what we call good mental hygiene.
It needs work. I mean, you mentioned that it does need work. You need, you can't, you have to pick up the phone and call people. You have to make an effort to meet people. And again, it goes back to the concept that you have time. It's a limited resource, but when you put it in numbers and you multiply the 24 hours by 7 days, there is time, but you have to make that effort. I mean, friends will leave you if you don't really nurture the relationship.
Not only that, but I think, as we've both been discussing, we're all time poor right now, for the most part. And so figuring out, putting your good foot forward and setting the stage so that someone can easily accept your invite makes it so much easier for them, right? And so if it's something where you have the ability to have some level of premeditation and concern, like, hey, I bought us tickets to the comedy show on Friday, can you go? Oh, you can't? Okay, well, great, they're refundable. When can you go? And if it's a friend, they're going to go, oh, I can go this next Thursday, right? If they're not a friend, they keep rushing you off, maybe you need to find another friend. So I think that's part of the problem, right? I certainly noticed that so many of us were sort of, just kind of kicking the can down the road because, as you trickle down Maslow's triangle, and you just don't feel safe all around, some of these higher needs can fall to the wayside. So essentially jump-starting them in some fashion becomes important, right? And it could just be like someone that you find friendly at work. I talk about this a lot of times. It's hard to find friends within your immediate cohort because of all the weird group dynamics that should exist at work because you need psychological safety with your immediate cohorts. But a casual friend, that you just enjoy their company, just a quick coffee before work, whatever it is, joining a book club, these things that seem so pedestrian when you say them out loud, but become so important. And when you talk to people after they do them, they're so invigorating. They're like, I can't believe I didn't do them sooner. Because the risk is, right, like, there's no way I'm going to have, like, I'm so tired going to a book club from 7 to 8. You kind of know it because I bet these podcasts have to be invigorating, right? Or you wouldn't do them, right? Like, and so this is your fun. So it's what's fun for you? Is it, talking with folks about books? Is it doing a podcast? Is it just enjoying, are you an introvert? So it's a intimate cup of coffee with a friend.
Well, so talk to me about introvert, extrovert. You spend a lot of time in the book about this, which I appreciate. And I think you go back and forth a little bit about how you define this and maybe tell listeners how you view the difference between introverts and extroverts when it comes to trying to reduce burnout, being happier and more fun.
Yeah, so condensed, essentially introverts still need that connection that we talked about, right? The science is clear there. The issue is when you're introverted, it can be depleting to be among big groups. And so some of the common complaints that I got from introverts when I was putting this material together is that a lot of these happiness books, quote unquote, are rah-rah, right? Like you need to get out there, just go, to a sporting event.
That's what's good about your book, though. I want to make sure
that
listeners, well, it's true because I was a little bit like, I don't want to really have like another self-improvement book, like I can go and conquer the world and win the NBA, but It wasn't like that. It was really so well done. It made me feel
Thank
that
you.
you really cared, but you also provide some practical solutions wherever you are in the spectrum of life.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway for me was getting introduced to Dr. Jeannie Tsai's work out of Stanford. And she's really highlighted, again, this Western idea that fun has to be boisterous and what we call in psychology high arousal, right? Like if you're not, doing a Tough Mudder or whatever, then that's not fun. Okay, well, if that's fun, right? Because it's been marketed to you so much, like I just must not be a fun person, so I don't need fun in my life. And you see a lot of people stuck in that mode. And so fun for you could be calm, serenity. And, for my brother, I talk about it in the book, a nice nature hike. He kind of wanted to play in the middle. So he found a group of hikers where he could sit and hike by himself if he wanted. And then when he wanted a little bit of conversation and connection, he could kind of move up to the group, talk. And I believe everyone in that group, kind of had the same affinity. So it's just playing around with what's fun for you. But to answer your question specifically, like throw out the idea that fun has to be, that Instagram influencer, clicking their heels on the beach, with a bunch of people in the background. Like if for you, again, it's just quiet serenity, a nice glass of wine, good company, amongst friends, then just organize that. But at least make sure there's some joy and delight in your life. If you're looking back at that 168 hours and you can't name 2 or 3 hours within your week where you're like, okay, that was good, then a radical course correction is needed. And so many of us are just have habituated our lives in a way that that's not happening, and it's clear what the outcome is.
Yeah, well, I've got some work to do, and I think some of my listeners do. I need to have more dessert and French fries, and that's what I
That's
need.
not true, though. You read the chapter about escapism as well, so
Yeah, I did. It's a great read. I really would love everybody to buy it and read it, and I really enjoyed it. Anything you want to share with listeners? I may have forgotten to ask you. I don't want to give them everything. I want to tease people to make sure that they really look into it. But anything specific that you would like to address before I let you go? I believe you have some basketball training to do.
that was tomorrow. But yeah, I appreciate that. The I think the main thing, we touched on both of it is, I think most of your listeners likely, have extremely busy lives. So what are the small steps that you can implement just to see, if it's going to be restorative and additive or depleting? Because often that fallacy is where we get stuck, right? Like I just, that's great, but I can't do it, right? And so there's 3 things. One, figure out what 2 or 3 hours you can kind of swap out things that you find really, really depleting. And maybe that's social media use. We all, on our phones, it will tell us what apps we're on. So, you might be a doom scroller. For some, it might just be, again, surfing. Like if you're looking back at how you spent your Wednesday and it's just plopped down on the couch and someone asked you 2 weeks from now, how did you spend that time? And you couldn't even give them an answer. Like find those spots, because the last thing I want to do is prescribe fun to be just another thing on your to-do list, right? That's essentially just another form of toxic positivity. And so find that space and then figure out what it is that you can play with to integrate it back in. Maybe it's just reestablishing a date night with your wife, like getting a sitter and just having that one day a week where you're reconnecting with a loved one. Maybe it is reconnecting to a hobby. Like I said, for me, it was reconnecting with playing music. Maybe it is just picking back up a book habit because that's what you love. Your kind of signature strength is curiosity. And so digging in to material instead of, again, just kind of perusing PubMed. My dad's a researcher, so he gets stuck in that mode. I had to kind of like, Dad, how much do you need to learn about PQQ? He's like, you're right. I've just essentially read the same study 10 times. So find those opportunities and then play with that time to re-invite joy and delight into your life. And then the second one would be, can you create transition rituals? Like really, you brought it up, like, I can always look at my email if I want. That's true, but play with shutting it down at 8 p.m. and not going back to it till maybe an hour after you get up, and see if it has any impact at all on your professional life. And I guarantee you, I don't guarantee, but I almost guarantee
No,
that it will have no impact, and you will start to see your heart rate variability go down. You'll start to feel calmer, and you'll start to feel more invigorated. And then hopefully you can now, because you're not essentially extending work until you hit your your head hits the pillow, maybe you can fit fun into those extra hours that you've reclaimed. So those are two pieces of parting advice.
Mike, Dr. Rucker, thank you so much. This is really amazing. I've learned a lot, and I think my listeners have learned a lot about a little bit more of integrating some of your advice and ideas into their life, because I do think it will hopefully lead to less burnout, more enjoyment, and improved quality of life. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I appreciate it as well. This has been a pleasure.
We're going to bring you back in about a year after we see people implementing these changes, and you're going to be on the hot seat. We'll see, like, I'm like, Mike, I kept eating dessert and it's not working.
Again, that's not what
I know. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
All right. Thank you for having me.